The conference room at Fort Carson fell silent as Major General Howard Bennett strode to the podium. Outside, the Colorado morning was crisp and clear, but inside the briefing hall, tension hung thick in the air. Captain Marie Sullivan sat in the third row, her uniform pressed sharp, her posture perfect, despite the exhaustion that pulled at her bones. She'd flown in from Germany just 8 hours ago. Barely enough time to shower and change before this mandatory assembly. Before we begin the quarterly review, General Bennett's voice boomed across the room. I want to take a moment to discuss operational excellence and what it truly means to serve with distinction. Marie's stomach tightened. She knew that tone. It was the same one her father had used when he wanted to make an example of someone. She glanced sideways at Colonel Frank Morrison, who sat 2 seats away, a slight smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. He'd been making her life difficult ever since she'd rejected his dinner invitation 6 months ago. Since then, every report she filed came back with red marks. Every decision she made was questioned. Every success somehow diminished. Leadership isn't about glory, Bennett continued. It's about making the hard calls when everything's falling apart around you. It's about bringing your people home. The general's eyes swept the room, and Marie felt them pause on her for just a moment. Her heart began to race. Something was coming. She could feel it in her bones, the same way she'd felt incoming fire in Kandahar. The same instinct that had kept her alive through 3 deployments. I've been reviewing some after-action reports from our recent operations, Bennett said, his voice taking on an edge. And I've noticed something troubling. We have officers in this room who seem more concerned with personal advancement than mission success. Morrison leaned forward in his seat, his smirk widening. Now, I'm going to put someone on the spot here, Bennett continued, because I think it's important we address this directly. Captain Sullivan, would you stand up, please? Marie's blood ran cold, but her training took over. She rose smoothly, her face betraying nothing, though inside she felt like she was back in that burning Humvee in Helmand Province, trapped and helpless. Captain Sullivan here submitted a report about Operation Guardian Angel 3 weeks ago. A report that, frankly, made some very serious accusations about command decisions during a critical firefight. Bennett's eyes narrowed. Would you like to explain to everyone here why you felt the need to question your superior officer's judgment? The room seemed to shrink around her. Marie could feel every eye boring into her back. This was it? This was Morrison's doing. He'd gotten to Bennett first, spun the story his way. Sir, with respect, my report detailed what happened during the extraction. I was simply following protocol. Protocol? Bennett's voice rose. Protocol is following your commanding officer's orders, Captain. Protocol is trusting the chain of command. What protocol tells you to second-guess a colonel with 20 years of experience? Marie's jaw clenched. Sir, the protocol that says we don't leave people behind. A murmur rippled through the room. Morrison's face darkened. That's enough, Bennett snapped. What's your call sign, Captain? The question came out of nowhere, sharp as a knife. Marie blinked, confused by the sudden shift. Sir, your call sign. The one you used downrange. I want to hear it. I want everyone in this room to hear it. Marie's mind raced. This was a trap, but she couldn't see the shape of it yet. Morrison was sitting back now, arms crossed, watching her like a cat watches a wounded bird. Specter 6, sir. The words left her mouth quietly, but they might as well have been thunder. The change in the room was immediate and electric. Bennett's face went pale. Morrison's smirk vanished, replaced by confusion. Several of the older officers in the front row turned around, their expression shifting from judgment to something else entirely, something that looked almost like shock. What did you say? Bennett's voice was barely a whisper now. Specter 6, sir. That was my call sign. The general's hand gripped the podium so hard, His knuckles went white. For a long moment, he just stared at her, and Marie had no idea what was happening. She only knew that something had fundamentally changed in the room. Some invisible line had been crossed. "Good God," Bennett said softly. Then, louder. Everyone else dismissed. "Colonel Morrison, Captain Sullivan, you stay." The room erupted in confused whispers as officers filed out, casting curious glances back at Marie as they went. She remained standing, her heart hammering, wondering if she was about to end her career or if somehow, impossibly, something else was about to happen. When the last officer left and the door clicked shut, Bennett slowly descended from the podium. His entire demeanor had changed. The anger was gone, replaced by something Marie couldn't quite read. "Colonel Morrison," Bennett said, his voice deadly calm, "I think you and I need to have a very long conversation about Operation Guardian Angel. But first, I want to hear Captain Sullivan's story. All of it, starting from the beginning." Marie's hands were steady as she pulled out her tablet, but inside, her mind was churning. Morrison sat across the conference table, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew. General Bennett had taken a seat at the head of the table, and the way he looked at her now was completely different. There was something in his eyes that looked almost like recognition, though she'd never met him before this moment. "Start from the beginning, Captain," Bennett said quietly. "Tell me about Operation Guardian Angel." Marie took a breath and began. "It was March 15th, 3 weeks ago. My unit was providing security for a medical convoy near the border. Intelligence said the route was clear, but I had a bad feeling about the valley we were supposed to pass through. Too quiet. No civilians, no traffic, nothing." "And you voiced these concerns?" Bennett asked. "Yes, sir. To Colonel Morrison, who was commanding the operation remotely from base. He told me to proceed as planned." Morrison shifted in his chair. "Captain Sullivan, you're oversimplifying." "Let her finish," Bennett cut him off. His tone sharp enough to make Morrison flinch. Marie continued, her voice steady despite the memories that threatened to pull her under. "We were halfway through the valley when the first RPG hit. It was a coordinated ambush. They had positions on both ridges. The lead vehicle went up in flames immediately. I called it in, requested permission to break off and establish a defensive position. But Colonel Morrison ordered us to push through." "That's standard procedure in an ambush scenario," Morrison interjected. "You don't stop, you move." "Not when there are wounded, sir," Marie said, her eyes still on Bennett. "The lead vehicle had 6 people in it. I could hear them screaming on the radio. The vehicle was disabled, but not destroyed. They were alive, but they wouldn't be for long if we left them." Bennett leaned forward. "What did you do?" "I made a decision. I ordered my driver to stop and provide covering fire while I took 3 volunteers and went back for the lead vehicle. Colonel Morrison was screaming at me over the radio to fall back, threatening me with insubordination charges, but I couldn't leave them. I wouldn't." The room was silent except for the quiet hum of the ventilation system. Marie's throat tightened as she remembered the smoke, the blood, the sound of bullets pinging off metal. We got to the vehicle under heavy fire. 2 were already gone, but 4 were still alive. We got them out, got them to cover. Then I coordinated suppressing fire from our position while calling in air support. The helicopters arrived 12 minutes later and drove off the insurgents. 4 lives saved, Bennett said softly. "Yes, sir." But Colonel Morrison's report painted a different picture. According to his version, I disobeyed direct orders, endangered the entire convoy, and only got lucky that air support arrived when it did. He recommended I be relieved of command and face a court-martial for insubordination. Morrison's face was red now. She violated the chain of command in the middle of combat. That kind of recklessness, that kind of courage saved 4 American soldiers, Bennett said, his voice cutting through Morrison's protests like a blade. "But that's not why everyone went silent when you said Specter Six, is it, Captain?" Marie's breath caught. "Sir?" Bennett stood and walked to the window, his back to them. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with something that sounded like old grief. "Specter Six wasn't just your call sign. It was someone else's first. Someone who died using it. Someone very important to me." The world seemed to tilt. Marie gripped the edge of the table. "Sir, I don't understand." Bennett turned around, and his eyes were wet. "My son, Captain David Bennett. He was Specter Six during the Fallujah operations in 2004. He was 26 years old when he died going back for his men. Just like you did. He disobeyed orders, too. His commanding officer wanted to leave 3 wounded Marines behind because extracting them was too dangerous. David went anyway. He got them out, but he didn't make it back himself." The air went out of the room. Morrison had gone very still, his face ashen. "After David died," Bennett continued, his voice rough, "his call sign was retired. No one was supposed to use it again. It was too painful, too sacred. But somehow, you have it." Marie's voice was barely a whisper. "Sir, I was assigned it by Major Patricia Flores. She was my first commanding officer in Afghanistan. She never told me why, but she said I'd earned it. That I reminded her of someone." "Patricia Flores," Bennett repeated, and a sad smile crossed his face. "She served with David. She was one of the 3 Marines he saved. She carried him out after he was hit." He looked at Marie with new eyes. "She gave you his call sign because she saw the same thing in you that I see now. The same courage. The same refusal to leave anyone behind, no matter the cost." Morrison stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Sir, this doesn't change the facts of what happened. She still disobeyed direct orders." "Sit down, Colonel," Bennett said, and there was steel in his voice now. "We're not done here. Not by a long shot." Colonel Morrison sank back into his chair, but Marie could see the desperation building in his eyes. A desperate man was dangerous, and she knew Morrison well enough to know he wouldn't go down without a fight. "General." Bennett moved back to the table and sat down heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. "Captain Sullivan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Why didn't you mention any of this before? Why didn't you tell anyone about the connection to my son?" Marie met his gaze steadily. "Because I didn't know, sir. Major Flores never explained. She just told me that Specter Six was a call sign that meant something, that it carried weight, and that I should honor it by never forgetting when it stood for protecting your people, no matter what. I've tried to live up to that every day since." Bennett nodded slowly, then turned to Morrison. "Colonel, I'm going to give you one chance to tell me the truth. Why did you really file that report against Captain Sullivan? And don't give me that lie about chain of command." Morrison's jaw worked silently for a moment. Marie could see him calculating, trying to find an angle. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Because she made me look incompetent, sir. I had a plan for that operation. A solid plan. When she deviated from it, she undermined my authority in front of the entire unit. Men need to know their commander is in control. Men need to know their commander gives a damn about their lives." Bennett interrupted. "Your plan would have left 4 soldiers to die. You know it, and now I know it. What I want to know is why. Why did you order her to leave them behind?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Morrison's face cycled through several expressions: anger, fear, calculation, before settling on defiance. "Because the tactical situation was too dangerous. We would have lost more people trying to save them. I made the hard call. Except we didn't lose anyone," Marie said quietly. "We got them all out, and the only injuries were minor. My team executed perfectly. You got lucky." Morrison slammed his hand on the table. "You could have gotten everyone killed with that cowboy stunt." "Or maybe," Bennett said, his voice dangerously soft, "you made the wrong call, and Captain Sullivan had the courage to make the right one. Maybe you've been trying to destroy her career ever since because you can't face the fact that a junior officer showed better judgment than you did." Morrison's face went from red to purple. "That's not. I pulled the recordings, Frank." Bennett's use of Morrison's first name made the colonel flinch. "I pulled every communication from that operation. I heard what you said to her. I heard you threatening her with court-martial while she was under fire, trying to save American lives. I heard you ordering her to abandon wounded soldiers. And then I pulled your other reports, the ones from the past 6 months." The general stood and walked to a briefcase Marie hadn't noticed before. He pulled out a thick file and dropped it on the table with a heavy thud. 47 correction requests on Captain Sullivan's paperwork. 16 formal complaints about minor uniform discrepancies. 23 recommendations that she be passed over for promotion or special assignments. All filed by you, all in the 6 months since she declined your dinner invitation. Morrison's face drained of color. "Sir, that has nothing to do with. I talked to Lieutenant Karen Walsh this morning," Bennett continued, his voice hard as granite. "She had an interesting story about how you cornered Captain Sullivan in the motor pool last December. About how you told her that her career would go a lot smoother if she was more friendly with her superior officers." Marie's hands clenched under the table. She buried that incident, tried to forget it, told herself she could handle Morrison's retaliation without making waves. But now it was all coming out, every petty cruelty, every professional obstacle he'd put in her path. "General, I think you're listening to, I talked to 6 other officers. Frank, 3 of them were ready to file formal complaints but didn't because they were afraid of retaliation. Just like Captain Sullivan was. You've been running a protection racket in your command, punishing anyone who doesn't fall in line, and using your rank to shield yourself from consequences." Bennett leaned forward, and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "But you made a mistake when you went after Captain Sullivan. You made a mistake when you tried to destroy the career of someone wearing my son's call sign. Because now I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of officer you are." Morrison stood abruptly, his chair toppling backward. "You can't do this. You don't have the authority." "I have every authority," Bennett said. "And right now, you have 2 choices. You can resign your commission with a general discharge, or you can face a formal investigation for harassment, abuse of authority, and falsifying official reports. Your choice, Colonel. You have 10 seconds to decide." The room spun with tension. Marie watched Morrison's face contort with rage, then fear, then finally resignation. When he spoke, his voice was hollow. "I'll resign." "Smart choice," Bennett said. "You have 48 hours to submit your paperwork. You're dismissed." Morrison walked to the door like a man heading to his execution. He paused at the threshold and looked back at Marie. For a moment, she thought he might say something, might apologize or at least acknowledge what he'd done. But he just shook his head and left, the door closing behind him with a final click. Marie sat in the silence that followed, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Everything had changed in the space of an hour. The weight that had been crushing her for 6 months was suddenly gone, lifted by a general she'd never met, because of a call sign she'd carried without understanding its full meaning. "Captain Sullivan," Bennett said gently, pulling her from her thoughts. "We're not quite done yet." General Bennett sat down across from Marie, and the hardness in his face softened to something almost paternal. The morning sun had shifted, streaming through the windows and casting long shadows across the conference table. Outside, the normal sounds of base life continued, soldiers jogging past, vehicles rumbling, the distant sound of a drill sergeant calling cadence. But in this room, Time seemed to stand still. "I owe you an apology," Bennett said quietly. "I brought you in here to dress you down, to make an example of you, all based on Morrison's lies. I should have looked deeper before today. I should have investigated properly. I let one of my officers abuse his authority under my watch, and I'm sorry." Marie shook her head. "Sir, you couldn't have known." "Yes, I could have," Bennett interrupted firmly. "That's my job. That's what command means. We're responsible for everything that happens in our units, the good and the bad. I failed in that responsibility, and you suffered for it. So did the other officers Morrison targeted." He stood and walked to the window again, looking out at the mountains in the distance. "When David died, I almost left the army. My wife begged me to retire, to come home, to stop putting myself through the pain of watching other people's children go off to war. But I stayed because I thought I could honor his memory by being the kind of leader he deserved to have. The kind who protects his people, who makes the hard calls for the right reasons." Marie heard the tremor in his voice and felt her own throat tighten. "Patricia Flores came to see me after David's funeral," Bennett continued. "She told me what happened that day in Fallujah. How David had argued with his CO, how he'd been threatened with charges, how he'd gone back anyway because he said those Marines were his brothers and he wouldn't leave brothers behind. She told me she tried to stop him because she knew it was suicide, but he went anyway. And then she told me something I'll never forget." He turned back to face Marie, and tears were running freely down his weathered face now. "She said that David's last words, right before he went back into that kill zone, were, 'This is what the call sign means. Specter 6 protects its own.' And then he ran into the fire and saved 3 lives at the cost of his own." Marie's own eyes burned with tears. She thought of all the times she'd answered to Specter 6, all the times she'd made decisions based on what she thought that call sign represented. And now she understood. She'd been carrying the legacy of a hero she'd never met, living up to a standard set by a man who'd given everything for his people. "Major Flores kept that call sign alive," Bennett said. "She must have passed it to you because she saw David in you. That same fire, that same unwillingness to compromise when lives are on the line. She gave you his legacy because she knew you'd honor it." "I've tried, sir," Marie whispered. "Every day, I've tried." "And you have," Bennett said firmly. "What you did in Operation Guardian Angel, that was exactly what David would have done. That was Specter 6 at its finest. And I want you to know that I'm going to make sure your real report, your true account of what happened, goes into the record. I'm going to make sure those 4 soldiers you saved know who brought them home. I'm going to make sure your next assignment is somewhere you can continue to be the leader you were meant to be." Marie stood, snapping to attention even as tears rolled down her cheeks. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Bennett replied. "Just keep being who you are. Keep being Specter 6. Keep bringing your people home." He extended his hand, and Marie shook it, feeling the strength and certainty in his grip. "There's one more thing," Bennett added. "I'd like you to come to dinner at my house this weekend. My wife Ellen and I would like to meet you properly. Patricia Flores will be there too. She's stationed at the Pentagon now, but she's coming out for a visit. I think it's time you heard all the stories about David, about what Specter 6 really means. I'd be honored." "Sir," Marie said, her voice thick with emotion. "Good," Bennett smiled. The first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "Now, you've had a hell of a morning. Take the rest of the day. That's an order." Marie nodded and turned to leave, but Bennett's voice stopped her at the door. "Captain Sullivan? Thank you for being worthy of that call sign. Thank you for keeping my son's legacy alive. And thank you for reminding me why I stayed in this uniform." As Marie walked out of the building into the bright Colorado morning, she felt different, lighter. The weight of Morrison's harassment was gone, replaced by something else, a sense of purpose, of connection to something larger than herself. She pulled out her phone and looked at the screensaver. A photo of her team, the people she'd fought alongside, the people she brought home. 3 weeks later, Marie stood at the front of a small ceremony at Fort Carson. General Bennett was there, along with his wife Ellen, a kind-faced woman with her husband's steady eyes. Patricia Flores stood in her dress uniform, her silver hair catching the sunlight. And in the front row sat 4 soldiers, the 4 Marie had pulled from that burning vehicle in the valley. Bennett stepped forward with a medal case. Captain Marie Sullivan, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States. For risking your life above and beyond the call of duty, I present you with the Silver Star. As he pinned the medal to her uniform, he leaned in and whispered so only she could hear, "David would be proud." "I know I am." The ceremony ended, but as people gathered afterward, one of the soldiers Marie had saved approached her. He was young, barely 22, with a fresh scar running along his jaw. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you. You didn't have to come back for us. You could have left us." Marie looked at him and smiled. "No, I couldn't have. That's not what Specter Six does. We protect our own, always." That evening, at dinner at the Bennett home, Marie sat between Ellen and Patricia Flores, listening to stories about a man she'd never met, but whose legacy she'd carried into battle. She learned about David's sense of humor, his love of terrible action movies, his habit of writing letters home every week without fail. She learned about the man behind the call sign, and in learning, she understood why that call sign meant so much. As the night grew late and the stories flowed, Patricia raised her glass. To David Bennett, the first Specter Six, and to Marie Sullivan, who proved that his legacy lives on. May we always remember what it means to protect our own. To Specter Six, everyone echoed, glasses raised. And Marie, sitting among people who understood the weight of the name she carried, finally felt at home. She'd been tested, broken down, and nearly destroyed by someone who couldn't understand what it meant to serve with honor. But she'd survived. She'd held the line. She'd brought her people home. That's what Specter Six did. That's what it would always mean. In the weeks and months that followed, Marie's career took a new direction. She was assigned to a training command where she could shape the next generation of officers, teaching them not just tactics and strategy, but something more important, the moral courage to do the right thing, even when it cost them everything. And whenever she introduced herself to a new group of cadets, she always started the same way. "My name is Captain Marie Sullivan. My call sign is Specter Six, and I'm going to teach you what that means." The call sign lived on, carried by a woman who'd proven worthy of it, honoring a man who'd given everything for his brothers in arms. And somewhere, in whatever place fallen heroes go, David Bennett was smiling, knowing that his legacy was in good hands.